What's up, guys? So my car's been super creaky over the last, couple thousand miles. It's super noticeable whenever I would like get out of the car. I'd step out and then you would just hear all these creaks from what sounds like the front suspension. It was also super noticeable after, the car's been warmed up and has been driving for a little bit. But going slowly through a parking lot, like every time you turn, it's just creaking real loud. At first I thought it was the power steering fluid maybe being low. I checked that and all was well. It was at the proper levels. So I started researching a little bit and learned that the front strut mount bearings are basically like a fucking throwaway item, right? Like they have to be replaced relatively often, I guess, compared to other cars. So anyways, I looked more into that, and that's what it sounds like could be my problem. I have the problem on both sides. I wish I could show you right now all the creaks and all the other sounds that the car makes, but the car's already up on the lift, so I'm not going to bother taking it back down. But basically, if you go on either side of the front of the car, push down on the fender, like you can clearly tell that something was creaking. And so I'm going to go ahead and replace my front strut mount bearings and hope that that's the right problem. So FCP Euro has a front strut mount bearing kit by Lemporter. It comes with the, this is the spring plate, kind of hard to see it. Comes with all new nuts for the strut towers. And of course the strut mount. This is the rubber part right here. And it was like 150 bucks for the pair, so pretty unreasonable. This is actually the bearing, sorry. It's the bearing as well as the rubber plate that the spring sits in. Yeah, this is the actual strut mount bearing right here. Let me take it out of the plastic real quick. I'm gonna show you guys. So yeah, this is basically just a bearing. Just slides in here. Oh, and it comes apart. I'm gonna put that back. Along with the strut mount bearing kit that I got, I also bought a few other things. I got new shock bellows or dust covers. Didn't really need them, but they were cheap. They're like $4 a piece, so why not? My bump stops were basically disintegrated, so I got new ones. And then I also picked up some new sway bar end links. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and take apart the front passenger side for you guys. The other side should be exactly the same, more or less. So let's get started. So here's basically all you're gonna need. You got your torque wrenches, of course, some thread locker if you decide to reuse some of the hardware, dead blow hammer, super helpful, anti-seize. I would highly suggest putting that sway bar link through the steering knuckle. I would definitely suggest using this to avoid potential seizing in the future. Your ratchets, 1/2-inch drive and 3/8 drive. Couple sockets. We got a 10mm, 13mm for the strut nuts, the top nuts. 10mm for the brake harness or brake pad sensors and the brake line, as well as the strut locking ring. 18mm for the sway bar end link, 2 steering knuckle, as well as the coffin arm bolt. 16 for the coffin arm bolt as well. You need a 7mm Allen key for the top of the strut, a 4mm Allen key to hold your sway bar end link, a Torx T30 also for the sway bar end link, D55 for the 2 caliper bolts, 21mm wrench for tightening and loosening the top of the strut. I got a 5/8 as well as a 16mm wrench. That's for the sway bar as well. And then a 17mm thin wrench. I just grinded this down. This is to hold the sway bar end link at the pinch point in the steering knuckle. You'll need a thin one to fit in there. But yeah, it should be basically all you need. Alright, so in order to access the top of the strut towers, we're going to have to remove these plastic panels to gain access. So we'll start by removing the center one, and then we'll be able to access the sides to remove them. So now you can see here we have access to the 3 bolts that hold the top of the strut to the chassis itself, right? So 1, 2, 3. Alright guys, so the first thing you're going to want to do is, of course, get the car up in the air and take the wheels off. Next thing you're going to want to do is we're going to want to take off this, the brake pad sensor harness. We're going to unclip the actual harness from the harness on the car. Then we're going to unbolt this, unbolt the harness from the strut mount itself, or from the steering knuckle. Then we're going to want to take off the brake line hose bolt. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right here. I can't get any light in here, but it's right here. And I think that bolt and that bolt should be a 10mm bolt. So we're going to take those 2 off. Then we're going to take the calipers off, and they're held by 2, what are they? They're 2 T55 reverse Torx star bolts. So you'll need a T55 socket to get the 2 caliper bolts off, which is one here, right there, and then one down here. Once you unbolt those, the caliper is going to come off, and make sure you have something ready to prop your caliper on. So right here I have a jack stand. I'm just going to sit it in there, just because you don't want it hanging down solely by the brake hose. So once that's done, we're going to remove the sway bar end link, which is back here. We're just going to remove that from the steering knuckle itself. We're not going to undo it from the sway bar end. Then make sure you undo this, the brake pad electrical stuff. It's on the harness. The wires, they loop into a bracket that's attached to the strut back here, so we're just gonna push that off and get that out of the way. Then there's a locking ring right here on the strut itself, and it basically just locks the strut at a certain height. But that's another 10mm bolt right there that we're gonna undo. And then the main bolt that holds, that clamps down on the strut itself is right here, and that's actually the same bolt for the sway bar end link. So we'll undo that. There's gonna be 3 bolts on top, on the strut tower that holds the top of the strut to the car. And last but not least, we're gonna just ever so slightly undo this bolt right here. So that bolt is what the coffin arms, or the control arms, attached to. And it's torqued down right now to stay at, so you can see it right here, this bolt right there. So that bolt keeps the control arm from dropping down too much. And so once you undo these top bolts at the top of the strut tower, you're gonna have to push down pretty hard in order to make enough clearance, to make enough room to clear the fender. But by undoing the coffin arm bolt right there, or loosening it a bit, you loosen the tension on the control arm, because there's a rubber bushing in there and it kind of acts like a spring. So once you loosen that, the control arm should droop down enough and shouldn't require anywhere near as much pressure, and should be pretty easy to clear the fenders. So enough talking, let's get to work. Alright, so we're going to start off with the brake pad sensor harness. So there's a little metal clip right here. So I'm just going to flip this out of the way. I'm just going to pull these cables out for the brake pad sensors. Okay, these just pop right out. So just get them out of the way. And for the harness itself, we've got our 10mm bolt right here. Just zap it off. Make sure you actually have a 10mm socket, not a 13. Boom, off. Put this out of the way. We can actually go and take the pop that harness out of the bracket that I mentioned earlier. So it's just back here. It's hard to see, but it basically just has a rubber grommet, and you just kind of pop it out. There it is. So you can see it right here. It's just basically a little rubber grommet, and it mounts to the bracket on the strut itself. Before we take the caliper off, I'm going to make sure I take off the unbolt the bracket that holds the brake hose, the brake lines right here. So it's a 10mm, another 10mm screw. Okay, it's off right there. Boom. Bracket is loose. Okay, I'll go ahead and take the caliper off now. Like I said, it's just a T55 reverse Torx bit. Okay, that's one right here. Here it is, reverse Torx. Okay, make sure you're holding the caliper so it doesn't fall. Your brake pads might be clamping down a little bit on the rotor, so it might take a little bit of wiggling. You might even have to pry it off a little bit. If you can, maybe take a screwdriver and try to make some space in between the pads and the rotor. Might be kind of difficult, but it's doable. So yeah, like I said, if you just wiggle the rotor a little bit, you should be able to get it off. Just make sure you don't drop it. Alright, so there it is. Rotor's off. So I'm just going to set it in my jack stand right here. Make sure she doesn't go anywhere. Okay. There's that. Now that we have the rotor off, I'm going to remove the sway bar end link, and on the inside here there is an allocation for an 18mm wrench. It has to be a bit thinner though, so I might grind down my 18mm wrench during install, but for now I'm just going to zip off the actual nut on the other side, which goes through the steering arm or steering knuckle. But yeah, right now I'm just going to zip it off. It's an 18mm nut. So zip it off real quick. Okay, that's off. I'm gonna use a little punch to punch the bolt out of the steering knuckle. So here's the tie rod, or sorry, the sway bar end link. It goes through the steering knuckle and out that side right there. So yeah, I'm just gonna punch that through. If it's super tight, you might have to place a jack under the brake rotor and kind of raise the whole assembly up a little bit to just relieve some tension off of the end link itself. But I'm just gonna use a punch and hammer it out. I'm actually going to go and get my jack and try to raise it up a little bit. Okay, just gonna jack the rotor up a little bit. Okay, real quick, I'm gonna loosen the strut mount, or the strut body ring. It's another 10mm socket. Okay, so right now the strut is loose. I'm gonna go ahead and loosen the little coffin arm thing real quick. So to do so, it's an 18mm bolt and then a 16mm nut. Before you guys take anything off, I like to make a mark on the coffin arms over here. So that way, when I'm installing everything and I'm retorquing this bolt that holds the coffin arms, I know where it's supposed to be at, because those bolts are supposed to be torqued with the car on the ground and all the weight on the wheels and stuff. So yeah, you want to make a marking so you can torque it down relatively where it's supposed to be at, and I'll simulate that with just jacking up the hub. Just made marks like this. So that way I know when I start pushing down on everything, I know that when I retorque the bolts, I want those to line up. So I'm going to use a breaker bar on the bolt end just to get it loose. Now I'll use a 16mm on this side to hold it still. Okay, that's broken free. I would suggest doing this before you take the brake caliper off, because it'll be less in the way. Okay. Okay, got this coffin arm loose, so now I should be able to drop it down pretty good. So yeah, definitely do that first, so the caliper's not in the way. So let's move this guy back. That's out of the way. Strut is loose, so all I'm going to do is remove the sway bar end link now. I'm just going to hammer it through, hopefully. Alright, so ran into a snag here. The other side sway bar end link, I just gave it a few taps with a hammer and it came right out of the steering knuckle. This one, however, seems to be little seized, so I've been like hammering it, I've been heating it up with a map torch, and now I think I'm gonna end up trying to cut this end off and seeing if I can impact hammer the end of it. So let's see. Okay, so I removed the sway bar end link from the sway bar itself, as you can see right here. And so I ripped the end off of the top portion and tried to take a pipe wrench to the ball. The ball is separate from the rest of it, so now I'm just going to cut that ball off, and hopefully I can impact these ends over here. So we'll see. Alright, the ball has been cut. Let's see if I can impact this off. Alright, was able to get her ground down, and now it is just a nut, so here goes nothing. Hopefully the impact works, otherwise I'm screwed. It's rounding it. So I've been hitting that with the impact, and it's actually moving now where it's rotating, so I'm going to try and give it some more wax with my impact hammer and see how that goes. Got her. Okay, so finally got that stupid sway bar end link bolt out. So now that should be it. Everything's free. Already got the the 10mm bolt off the locking collar on the strut off. So all I have to do now is remove the 3 bolts on the strut tower right here. And then the strut will drop right out. So like I said before, just take off the plastic panels and they'll give you access to the 3 bolts right there. I currently have my hub jacked up real quick, or jacked up a little bit, just to make sure the strut doesn't just drop down as soon as I loosen these top bolts right there. So I just have it up, holding the weight, taking the weight off of the actual strut tower bolts themselves. So let's get those unbolted, and then we'll lower the hub assembly. The bolts on the strut tower are 13mm, so there's 3 of them. So we're just gonna zap those off real quick. So now all I have to do is just remove my jack. We'll lower the arm, and then I should be able to pull the strut out. Like I said, I'm just going to lower the jack a little bit. I'm going to also continue to hold the strut because once you lower it, the strut's going to want to fall down, and it could end up whacking your fender. So you want to just hold it while you're lowering the jack. So let's do that. So you do want to be a little careful because part of the plastic undershield is still bolted to the rest of the under panel. So some of the weight on the hub is resting on the control arm and stuff. So just be wary of that. Shouldn't be a big deal, but I wouldn't push too hard on the strut, otherwise you could end up breaking the panels. The easiest way would be to just remove them, but so yeah, just lower it, and you should be able to lower it enough, and press down enough that you clear the fender. Oop. I really don't like this. So I gotta push down a little bit, but should clear the fender pretty good. There it is. So boom, now I have access to my strut, and it should be able to just come right out. And there she is. Alright guys, sorry if it's a little bright, but here we have the strut taken off of the car. So basically all we need to remove is this nut, which I'm going to use my impact, but you could fit a hex wrench in here as well to lock the actual piston of the shock in place and keep it from rotating, and then you would just take a wrench and then rotate that while holding the shock still. But like I said, I'm going to take an impact wrench to it. Before you do all that though, you'll have to compress this spring so that this doesn't shoot out once you remove the nut. So let's go ahead and get my spring compressor on, which I rented from O'Reilly's. Okay, here's my spring compressor. Basically it has these little pins that kind of just keep everything secure, but you're basically just going to try and fit this in as best as you can. And then this bolt right here, this rotates so that you can actually clamp down on the spring. Sure these pins are secure. Okay, that's one. Get the other side. Try to space them out evenly too, if you can. Okay, make sure your pins are in place. Okay. Go ahead and tighten this guy up. There's not a lot of clearance, so I can't really impact this side, but I'm going to impact this side. I like to also just line it up away from everything, away from the car, so if it does shoot out, it's not going to damage anything. Okay, let's go ahead and tighten this guy up. So you can see that the spring is compressed a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and shoot the bolt on the top mount off. So that's a 21mm bolt. So let's hit that with the impact real quick. I'm going to hold on to the strut body. Okay, so there's that. There's my nut. Okay, there it is. Springs out and compressed. So here's the whole strut mount assembly. So you have the spring, the rubber perch. This is my bearing, which you can see is completely kind of fallen apart. Not great. So you want to keep this spring perch right here. Keep that. Then you have your strut mount. Then you have your top hat, which we're also replacing. That goes like that. And then you have this little washer plate, and then your nut. So, cool. Well, I forgot about this guy too. So you have that. Let's just put everything in order. Oops. So we have it all. Oh, and then you also have this thing. It's beveled on the inside, so it sits right here on the shock body. It sits flush, so don't lose that. I'm going to be replacing my boot as well as my bellow. My bellows are fine, but they were $8, so fuck it. You know, went ahead and bought new ones. But yeah, so this is the my bump stop too. You can see it's pretty torn up. Maybe. Sorry, it's so bright out here. So yeah, replacing that guy. Okay, so here's my bellow and my strut mount, or my bump stop. So it basically just goes in like this. Just put it in from the bottom and then push it out. Should have little grooves in there so that it can't come out. Okay. Yep, that should be it. So this is just gonna go right back in like so. Push her over the shock body. Then from here we're gonna put on our little washer thing, the beveled washer. So it's gonna go like, oops. So it's just gonna sit right here. Make sure you have it going the correct way as well. Okay, so yeah, make sure this is going the right way. This is incorrect. There's a bevel right here on the shock body and it should slip right over it and be flush. Then you have your little washer plate. It's gonna go in downwards. Okay, so here's my new strut mount bearing. Here's the top hat. So this is the top portion of it. So I'm gonna slide strut mount bearing down like so. Okay, cool. Got my little spring perch, the little rubber thing right here. That follows that. So now I can put my spring back on, like so. Make sure it's rotated in there. And then I'll put this guy back on. Gonna have to compress it quite a bit more. You're basically watching me struggle to get the strut top mount assembly onto the strut. Unfortunately, the spring compressor that you can rent from your local auto parts store like AutoZone or O'Reilly's, it can only compress so far. If you take a look at the assembly, there's quite a bit of space in between, you know, the tightest point that the compressor can go. If you're going to do this job, you should probably just buy a different style of spring compressor. There's a bunch of them available on Amazon. I'll throw some links in the description for you. But they can basically go just a little bit tighter, which is what you're going to need for these style of springs. The ones that you can rent from O'Reilly's, I've used them in the past and they work great, but they're usually being used on springs that are, you know, straight up and down, as opposed to these, which are kind of, you know, almost conical. You know, they're wider at the base than they are at the top. Also, another thing to note is that the spring compressor that I rented is quite a bit bigger and just clunky. It kind of makes it difficult to get everything tightened down. Like you saw earlier, I can only use my impact wrench on one side. So that makes things difficult, especially if you're doing this on the car. So, like I said, a different style of spring compressor would be ideal. And they're about like, you know, 50, 60, 70 bucks or so on Amazon. But yeah, essentially I end up giving up at this point, and I just end up switching to another method of getting the springs on. Alright, well, it's not going to fit with the spring compressor. I have a new one on order, but I want to try. I have to get this done pretty soon, so because I have an alignment appointment, so I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way and just basically assemble it while it's on the car. Use the weight of the car to compress the spring. Alright, so basically the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to insert the strut into the steering knuckle, And then I'm going to insert the top hat into the top there, lightly bolting those up to the strut tower, and then I'm going to raise the whole assembly up into it, and then hopefully squash the spring down enough to bolt it together. So yeah, it would be nice to be able to use a spring compressor, but my don't fit, and I can't really risk waiting until my other one comes in, so let's just do it this way. I'm gonna go ahead and stick the strut in here. Strut's going in. Just watch your fenders. Okay. Strut is in. That guy's in. Let's watch that. Okay. Set her down here real quick. Gonna lower the assembly a little bit here, as much as I can. Okay. Let's go ahead and fit the spring on there. Make sure it's sitting in the little recessed area right there. Okay. Boom, that's fine. So now I can go and slide this under with the strut mount. Alright, let's line this up. Okay. Of course. Can't really get this under. Push down on this a little bit in order to make it fit. Ooh, it was barely going clear. And perfect. Okay. So now I can stick the strut mount on top of the spring. Okay, when you're putting the top hat in, you want to line up the studs that have the arrows on them. You want to line them up with along the side of the car, and don't forget about your this little top washer part. So we're gonna loosely put this in here. So that guy's in there. Try to line her up with this top portion. If you can kind of see here, I'm trying to keep everything lined up while I jack it up, and the goal is to get the top of the shock right here through this hole up there. So then once I get it through, I'll use the weight of the car to compress the spring, and then I can bolt it all up. There's a little pocket on the spring in the spring perch, and it needs to sit up against it. There you go. Alright. Like I said, I'm just going to raise the car up and hopefully get everything into that hole. Okay, so far so good. Okay, she's in the hole now. Just gotta jack it up until I can see the hole, see the bolt. So you can see the hole is now exposed, or sorry, the bolt. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tighten that guy up again. Make sure you didn't forget the washer on top. Okay, so let's just bolt this guy down as much as I can, and then we'll remove the strut from the car and tighten it back up. Okay. Okay. Gonna unbolt it from the top. unbolted, so I'm gonna drop the strut down and then pull it out so that I can tighten it. Okay, it's coming. Alright, we're gonna just drop her down. I'll lower it a little bit. Let's jack out of the way. Okay. Now I should be able to clear the fender. Wash the bolts. Okay. Now that I have the strut pulled out, I just need to torque everything down. So this bolt, or this nut, it's a proper torque specs 59 foot-pounds. Got a 7mm Allen key, or Allen wrench. I'm just going to hold that in place. Stick that in the top so that the strut doesn't spin. And I'm just going to torque her down as best as I can. So it's easier to do it with the strut in the steering knuckle so that you don't have to worry about trying to hold it and keep the whole strut from spinning. Pretty tight now, so I'm going to go ahead and just give her a final torque. Try to estimate 59 foot-pounds. Shouldn't be too bad. Okay, that should be pretty good. Get this out. Alright, that's done. The installation is just going to be a reverse of removal. So we'll start off by sliding this guy in and popping it into the strut tower. Get her bolted up to the top. I've got some new hardware, or some new bolts that came in my kit. So I'm going to use those. Set them right here. Alright, let's push this guy in. Watch the fender. Just enough clearance. Alright, so I got my arrows are pointing this way. Okay, that looks like it's good. Shock's good. Little bump stop. Okay. Start raising this guy up. We're in. So I'm gonna go tighten these guys down. Get these nuts on there real quick. Okay. That's all good. I'm gonna put my little cap back on. Okay, cap's on. Okay, let me raise this up real quick. A little bit more. Okay. See if I can. Okay, so alright, that's pushed all the way for maximum negative camber. Let's zip these guys down real quick. The torque value for these is 20 foot-pounds. Top's done. Now that the strut is on, let's go ahead and get this pinch bolt on as well for the sway bar. I'm definitely going to try and mitigate the seized bolt, so I'm just going to stick some anti-seize on this side of the bolt. That should prevent any sort of corrosion for the next time I have to take these off. Just going to be using some copper anti-seize right here. You don't need much. A little goes a long way. Good. Okay. We'll go ahead and stick this guy in. And boom, pops right in. And that's how it should be when you remove it, right? Once you loosen the nut on that side, this should slide right out. But unfortunately, mine did not want to cooperate as such. So we got that there. They gave me new bolts with the sway bar end length, so let's get these guys on. Okay, it's an 18 millimeter nut, so let's get this guy on. There's that. Okay. I'm not going to torque that guy on yet. I'm going to go ahead and insert this other guy onto the sway bar. So the stock sway bar came with this little lock nut, which just basically covered up some of the exposed threads. So this is your sway bar end link, this inserted here, and then boom, you got a lock nut on there. I could reuse it, but I don't know. They supplied new lock nuts, so I might use these instead. Remember, you need to lock the sway bar end link in place with a Allen key. Goes in the sway bar. That goes on. It into place with the Allen key. Lock her into place. So the torque for the end link is it's like 34 foot-pounds, something like that. There's no way I'm going to be able to fit a torque wrench in here along with holding it down with the hex key, so I'm just going to get it good and tight. Okay, should be good. So I guess from here we can go ahead and torque the sway bar to carry your pinch bolt. We'll go ahead and torque that down. Went ahead and ground down a new wrench, 17 millimeter. It's nice and thin, like so. So I'm going to use that to keep the sway bar end link from spinning while I torque it down to 63 foot-pounds. Okay, 63 foot-pounds. Okay, with the pinch bolt on, next up we'll go ahead and put the caliper back on. Go ahead and push this piston in a little bit. Oh. Make some space. Oh. Okay, torque spec on the caliper bolts is 63 pound-feet. We'll get this, the brake hose, the brake line bolt in. Okay, so that's just this little 10 millimeter rinky-dinky guy. Okay, that one's on. Let's get this harness. Make sure you plug it into the, or get it situated on the bracket on the back. So it just pops right in. Okay, that's on. I'm gonna go ahead and plug these guys in. Make sure you guys get the right, correct one in there. It'd be impossible to f it up. Alright, so okay, that guy's in there. Now this guy. Okay, those are on. Lock the tab in. Okay, now we can throw the mounting bolt in. Should be this long guy. Okay, that guy is on. Torque down. Okay, so that's that. Everything's on and torqued. The final thing to do now is to torque the coffin arm bolts. Alright, so let's get this stuff out of the way. Oh yeah, before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put this bolt in for the lock ring on the strut. So yeah, that's another 10mm bolt, so we'll just zip that guy in real quick. Okay, should be good. The torque for the coffin arm bolts is 77 foot-pounds. It's going to be kind of hard to fit my torque wrench in there, so I've got a couple wobble extensions. Hopefully I can do it. Before we do, we got to remember to line up our marks on the coffin arm and on the chassis. So yeah, all I'm going to do is just jack up the car a little bit until my tick marks match. Looks like my markings are a little off. Apparently I marked on a washer, and so that's been rotating as well, so don't do that. So I'm just going to jack the car up. You basically want to simulate what it would be like with the car on the ground. I'll jack the car up until the car starts to lift off of the quick jack, or just about. That way it's pretty close. Don't be stupid like me and put the markings in the wrong spot. So I didn't realize that this right here where I put my markings, this is a washer, so that kind of rotated as I fidgeted with everything. So don't put your marks there. Ideally you'd put it on the coffin arm itself right here. So even this, I think this rotates as well. You want to put it on the coffin arm, this part, and then probably mark it over here on the chassis itself, so nothing moves whenever you fidget with everything and raise and lift the assembly and stuff. That's pretty good. That's about fully weighed down, so let's go ahead and torque it. Again, it's about 77 foot-pounds. Got it. Alright, 77 foot-pounds on that guy. That is it. Everything is good. All the harnesses are on. Right? Harness is on, plugged in. Brake line is connected. Calipers are torqued. Locking ring is on. Sway bar end link pinch bolt is torqued. Sway bar end link to sway bar is torqued, and coffin arm is torqued. So top mounts are torqued as well. So that should be everything. The other side is the same exact thing, just might be different sides, but anyways, hope that's helpful for you guys. Hopefully you don't have a C sway bar. If you do, check out my other video. Thanks for watching. Peace.